Welcome to today's colloquium. Today we're very honored to have Dave Baranek, who was born and raised in Jacksonville, Florida, and as a child set his sights on flying jet fighters. He attended Georgia Tech and entered the Navy in 1979. Shortly after he joined his first squadron, he received the call sign Bio, which many of his former squadron mates still call him. And in fact, he was being called all through the luncheon. He enjoyed a successful and rewarding 20-year career in the Navy, which included an assignment as a Topgun instructor, where he had the unusual experience of flying aerial sequences used in the film Top Gun, and served as a dialogue advisor on the project. He later was assigned to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the U.S. 7th Fleet. He then commanded an F-14 Tomcat fighter squadron, responsible for nearly 300 people and 14 aircraft worth about $700 million. So you can divide and tell me how much each was worth. He retired from the Navy in 1999 and now works as a defense contractor. So with that, let's welcome Dave to the lab.
Very nice. Thanks, Dan. Who's heard of Top Gun? Okay. It was a movie. It came out in 1986. Has anyone seen it? Anybody? All right. So if you did see it and you paid attention to the beginning, you probably know that it's also a real Navy squadron. When I was 27 years old, I started to be a Top Gun instructor. Before that, I was an F-14 backseater like Goose. We never said, like Goose until the movie came out. Now all you gotta do is say that, everybody goes, yeah. After that, as Dan said, I continued my career. So I'm gonna talk to you today about some of the things I experienced, some of my organizational lessons, personnel lessons, and things like that. I don't know if I will teach you anything. Maybe I will. We'll see. As a child, I wanted to do a lot of different things. Probably a lot of people go through this, but when I was around 10 years old, I knew I wanted to fly jet fighters. And after I made that decision, my decision never changed. So in order to fly fighters in the U.S., you have to have a college degree if you want to be in the U.S. military. So I went to Georgia Tech, and while I was at college, my eyesight went bad. So there was no way that I could be a fighter pilot, because you have to have 20/20 vision, and this was, as Dan said, it was back in the 70s, and they did not have all the eye surgery. So it wasn't that my dream died, I just had to change my dream because the Navy was bringing on this fantastic new airplane called the F-14 Tomcat that had two guys, and the guy in the back seat could wear glasses. So my dream was alive. So I went to Pensacola for training. This was me, my second to the last flight in Pensacola. Trained in Pensacola for about almost a year. Then I went to F-14 training in San Diego. And after almost 2 years of training, I joined my first fighter squadron. And at that time, I was 22 years old. So do we have any fighter pilots in the room? Any pilots? Okay, were you a fighter pilot or a private pilot? Oh yeah, all right, cool. And do we have any Rios in the room? Backseaters or other aircrew, non-pilot aircrew? All right, I know some of these guys, just had lunch with them. So they're gonna keep me honest a little bit. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through this rather quickly. We're gonna go for about an hour. I will fill most of the time, but I will try to go through it a little bit quicker than normal to leave room at the end for questions. But you can interrupt me during the talk, and I'll either answer your question real time or I will just say, wait a minute, and I'll get to that. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, and looking at the room, I realized that for a lot of you, these are prehistoric times, just about. So the Top Gun squadron started in 1969 during the Vietnam War. And it was tremendous that the Navy, this big, large organization with a lot of pride, realized that it had a problem and took this incredibly incredible step to address the problem, and it actually worked. Then the F-14 had its first flight in 1970, first F-14 deployment. I was looking at this slide, which I just put this together so we could talk, and I go, there's a big gap in here when I didn't have a bunch of stuff, and I thought about what was going on, and I said, well, during the first few years, they're addressing reliability and operational issues, and then later, once the plane got sorted out, they were addressing tactical developments, and we'll talk about some of those. Then in 1991, the F-14 started to drop bombs for the first time in training in 1991. But then in 1992, the Navy selected the Super Hornet. So the F-14 was terminal at that point, but it served for another 14 years until 2006. So the F-14 had two primary missions. One that is well known was that it was supposed to do fleet air defense or maritime air superiority, and that is to defend a carrier battle group, and that's a group of ships, from a raid by Soviet bombers. Now this may seem far-fetched, but in the 1970s and 1980s, when the US and the USSR were really strategic competitors, you had to have a defense against that. Because if you don't have a defense against something, it's a weakness and your enemy can exploit it. So the F-14, that was one of its missions, fleet air defense. And a lot of people think of it as an interceptor, which bugs me because it was really designed as a fully capable fighter. Even though it's a large airplane, it had incredible maneuverability for its time. It had good power, it had a versatile weapon system. It was a fighter that would escort American bombers on missions and also fly over enemy territory to take on enemy airplanes. So it was both a fighter and a defense and an interceptor. Since we were a Navy fighter squadron, we did a lot of carrier operations. I looked through my logbook, and for my first 3 years, about 50% of my flights were associated with carriers, either takeoff and landing or flying out to the carrier or flying back. An aircraft carrier has... Have you looked out front lately? Because an aircraft carrier is a huge machine. Has anyone in here been on an aircraft carrier or been up to? Okay, so it is massive. If it were a building, you would think that it's huge. And so this shows you it's it's about 1,100 feet long, the modern carriers. But in the area that an airplane has to touch down in is much smaller. And this is the safe landing area for an F-14 is roughly the yellow rectangle or whatever shape rectangle. And I superimposed it on a football field for perspective. And the reason the plane has to touch down in that area is because there's other airplanes and machinery parked on the carrier flight deck. It's got to catch one of those 4 cables that's stretched across the landing area. And so it's some of the most demanding flying that is performed on a routine basis. And the Navy does a lot of training to make its pilots capable of landing on the aircraft carrier. And again, if I'm saying something that needs more explanation, feel free to interrupt me. Just something to remember is that the carrier is about 60 feet above the surface of the ocean. It goes through the ocean about 20 to 30 miles per hour. It bobs up and down. Even though it's huge, it still moves up and down a little bit. We could be doing this at night. The weather could be bad. The pilot or the crew may have some problem. They may only have 1 engine instead of 2. They may be low on fuel. They could be on fire. So it really is an incredible feat of airmanship every time there's a safe landing on a carrier, and there is almost all the time. So the Navy trains its pilots very well. This is a selfie that I took back in the 1980s. We did not call them selfies back then, but a few guys took them. Did you guys take selfies? Did you ever take any? Yeah, we called them face shots or something like that, but selfie. So let's talk about the mission of the F-14 crew. In the front seat is the pilot. He's got the stick, the rudder pedals, the throttles. It's his job to fly the airplane. This is the back seat. In the F-14, there was no flight controls. So there was no way I could take control of that airplane. And that's the way the Navy buys when it has a two-seat airplane. The Navy doesn't put controls in the back. The Air Force two-seaters do have controls in the back. So my mission was, or my primary task was to operate the radar. The F-14's radar was designed in the 1960s. It was incredibly capable when it was new. And there were just things that they could not automate. They couldn't, and so they wanted a guy back there to operate the radar in the most challenging environments. The pilot was capable of flying the plane. You know, a Navy pilot in training, he flies a plane by himself. So a pilot could fly the plane by himself, but since there was a guy in the plane, the Navy did something smart. They assigned tasks to the backseater. And so the Rio, in addition to operating the radar, he was responsible for communication and navigation. And again, a Navy pilot is capable of talking on the radios, but the Rio is the guy who did it by convention. And so it took a lot of crew coordination to be effective. And typically when a new pilot and Rio start working together, they'll spend some time talking to each other. You know, this is what I do, this is what I like to hear, I don't like you to say that, whatever. And then come back from a flight and debrief, and you continue to learn lessons about each other and improve your crew coordination. So it's really an interesting environment being in this fighter and working out and becoming more effective. Now for me, even though I wanted to fly ever since I was about 10 years old, I didn't really know much about it. I mean, you can read magazine articles and stuff like that, but until you strap into a jet fighter and go out there and fly, it's hard to imagine what it's really like. Does anybody here do flight simulator games at home? Just, you know. Okay, so you've got a sense of what it's like. But to do it for real, when you're flying inverted, your inner ear tumbles, you get disoriented. The first few times that you do it, and especially the first few times that I did it, it was disorienting and confusing. I'll just tell you this real quick, that my very first flight in the Navy, I got airsick. And so luckily I was expecting I might, so you know, I didn't make a big mess or anything. And I'm sitting there going, you know, I want to fly jet fighters. I hope I get over this. And the good thing is that I did. After a few flights, it didn't bother me anymore, and I can take anything. And I also talked to, you know, a lot of guys it happened to, and so it's not, I wasn't the only guy that dealt with something like that. But training a guy to go from just a college graduate to be a fighter Rio is a case study in training, and the military does this all the time, so they're very good at it. They've got a system of mentoring, of gradual training, and it's just, you can't say enough about the value of a good training program. So as I said, when the F-14 was brand new, weapon system was impressive for the times. The radar had the longest range of any fighter radar when the airplane was brand new. It also had something that was new. It was the ability to track more than one target at the same time. Okay, so how many people in here, are people in here generally familiar with radars? Okay, radars. The F-14's radar did have some weaknesses, and that was over land. It showed a lot of clutter in some radar modes. And also it could not track targets through some maneuvers. And this was just a product of the times. More modern radars have resolved those problems. And so it took a skilled operator to get the most out of the F-14's radar. In terms of the weapons, we carried 3 different types of missiles. This shows the AIM-9 Sidewinder, which was a heat-seeking missile of short range. This is the AIM-7 Sparrow. It's a radar-guided missile of medium range. Those are the terms we use, short range, medium range. If you know anything about aviation history, you know that both of those missiles were used in the Vietnam War, and they really had a low success rate. But after that, by the time I came along in the 1980s, The missiles had been improved and the training had been improved. And so they were versatile missiles. They were very capable, and we were pretty confident carrying them around and using them. The F-14's big unusual missile was the AIM-54 Phoenix, that big white one there, which we sometimes called the Buffalo, just because it's so big. Theoretically, a Tomcat could carry 6 of them. I personally never carried more than 2 because they were large and they weighed 1,000 pounds each. This picture shows the relative size of that missile. It's, I believe, about 13 feet long and it weighs 1,000 pounds, but it could fly out and hit targets that were 100 miles away. Some test launches were actually launched at targets 100 miles away. One reason it was so big, because it had a big rocket motor, but also it had its own radar in the front, so it could guide itself to the target in the terminal phase. Being a big missile designed to go against bombers, it had a large warhead. The early versions of Phoenix got kind of a bad rap because they had some limitations about tracking small maneuvering targets. But one, they had the capability to go against fighters, and 2, the Navy introduced an improved Phoenix in 1987 that fixed a lot of those limitations. So it was a capable missile, and once again, we felt comfortable operating these missiles, this weapon system, and taking all this stuff into potential combat. Okay, let's get to some operational situations. I joined my first squadron in 1981. A few months after that, we went on a 7.5-month deployment. Has anybody been on a 7.5-month business trip? Okay, you've been on a deployment before. Some of you guys have been on deployments, but you go away for like that, and it's a long time. And this was in 1981. There was no email. A letter took 10 days to get from where we were back to the United States, 10 days each way. So you had to plan ahead. At the time, I was a single guy. I didn't leave my wife at home, and so I thought it was kind of interesting to get out there and leave your daily cares behind and see parts of the world. We left San Diego, went to Pearl Harbor, went to the Philippines, and I saw these cities that I had either barely heard of or places that I'd never heard of, and some of them I certainly didn't expect to go. And here I found myself wandering around the streets of Singapore, which was a cool city even back then. Some of the things that are different about a deployment, as soon as an aircraft carrier passes or passed Hawaii, we always carried live missiles on the F-14, and the other airplanes always carried live weapons. When you're out there, the Soviet Union used to send patrol planes and bombers down to try to sneak up on the aircraft carrier, and so you would fly out and intercept them and escort them whenever they're near the aircraft carrier. This is something, I don't want to be over dramatic, but the Soviet Union, and I'm not saying Russia because it was the USSR at the time, they would sit there and they would do things like they would try to, when you'd get close to them, in escort position, they would slow down and get into a real slow airspeed where you have to be very careful when you're flying. And then they'd make a sharp turn into you to try to make you maneuver to avoid collision and lose your airplane. And so we talked about this to each other. If ever we were escorting these guys, we said, don't get too close to them, don't let them turn into you stuff. But they were trying to make you, lose your airplane. So there was a lot of gamesmanship, and it was serious. Now, most of the time when you're out there, they would just hold up signs and they try to say, how are you doing, American, and stuff like that. So it's just fun stuff. But you always had to be careful. Something else about being on the deployment was, or another type of flying we did some more realistic training. We would fly long-range simulated strikes, so the fighters would escort the bombers. At this time in 1981, there was no war going on that the United States was involved in, so we weren't doing combat ops. But one point of having a carrier out there is to be ready to respond to combat operations. And so we kept practicing. We made sure that we were ready for anything. When the as soon as the deployment started, I was assigned to fly with the squadron commanding officer. Now, I was one of the newest guys in the squadron. As I said, I was 20, I was about 23 years old. The commanding officer was almost 40. And, I'm 23, and I'm thinking, 40? God, this guy is old, and should he still be flying? But, he was okay. But he had been in combat in Vietnam. He had been a Blue Angel. And and I'm talking about him being old, but I still know the guy, and he could outrun me. He's a better softball player than me, so he's a good guy. So anyway, so I had a lot of adult leadership, by flying with the squadron commander. And we called the commanding officer, we called him skipper. So that's just a term it's familiarity, but it's a term of respect in a Navy squadron. So one thing that you'll notice is right in the middle of the Indian Ocean, there's a red X, and it says Renegade 205. On December 19th, 1981, a day that I'll always remember, we were flying back to the ship from a routine flight, and somebody had not set one of the cables correctly on the arresting gear. And so this is what happened. I put this on YouTube, and so I wrote some explanation on there. 5:15 in the afternoon, we're coming back to the ship on a routine flight. We have no indication that anything is wrong. We're going to first see it from a camera mounted in the flight deck, and then it's going to show, we're going to see it again. So watch closely here. Right over the side. So the plane went over the side. I'll just let it run for a couple more moments because this was something that I thought was kind of interesting. Watch all the people on the flight deck. Now you can start to see them. They ran over because the plane was in the water right next to the ship, and they ran over to see us. And there's really not much else to see in that. And this is a picture that a sailor took of the actual event. So let me tell you what happened real quick. We came in for landing. We caught the number 4 cable. I had been in the squadron about 6 months. And I had about 40 or 50 arrested landings. So I had a little bit of experience at this time. As soon as we caught the cable, it slowed us down, and you're thrown forward in your straps. And then I realized that I'm sitting straight back, sitting upright. And has anybody in here been in a car accident? Have you been in a car accident? Okay, so you've experienced time distortion, where your brain starts to work real fast and everything. Well, that started to happen to me immediately. The first thing that I thought of was, I may have to eject, and in order to eject, I'd have to pull this handle that's on the seat in front of me. And the incredible thing was, I did not reach for the handle. By the time I thought that, my hands were already there. So I go, okay, that was pretty cool. So my hands were there. Yeah, it's kind of like the Matrix or something, And so my hands are there. And then I start thinking, if I pull this handle, there's no going back. And then I started thinking, something just happened on the Constellation. And anyway, all these thoughts, So we get to the end of the flight deck, and the pilot goes, eject, eject. Now, all this time that I'm telling you about my thinking, that took like 1 second. Because from the time we caught the cable till the time you get to the end and you decide it's not, you have to eject. That happened just like that. Okay, the pilot said eject. As soon as he said the word E, I knew what he was going to say, so I pulled the handle. So I pulled the handle, canopy comes off, and then the ejection seat, which is just an incredible machine of hundreds of parts, it just goes to work. The seat fires. I blacked out for just a second. I was disappointed because I'd always heard about people ejecting, and they said they watched themselves fly out of the airplane, and I always thought that would be cool, but I blacked out. Well, so the plane fell off the deck, the seat went up, so there's a down vector and an up vector, and the result was that I went about as high as the tails of that plane on the flight deck. I went about this high. Guys that were watching saw it. Started to come down. The seat goes through an automatic sequence. It knew I was at low altitude. We were at low altitude, so it separated my belts holding me to the seat. It opened the parachute, and then it blew the parachute open, which something that I always thought was a cool name was the ballistic spreader gun. If you're at low altitude, it blows the parachute open. Parachute goes boom, and I opened my eyes just before I splashed into the water. Okay, since I wasn't drifting much, the parachute came down all around me. Now, in Pensacola, they had taught us about this. They even put us in a big pool, and they put us in a parachute, and you calmly back your way out of it, and it's good training, and you go, okay, there's no need to panic. The other thing was, as soon as I hit the water, my saltwater activated inflation device inflated. And I was the second or third guy to use this. It had just been introduced like a month before. And so it's hit the water, that inflates, I pop up, I'm in my parachute. I remembered my lessons from Pensacola. And I start to calmly back out of the parachute because, you don't want to fool around with that thing. And the reason is that if you're tangled up in the parachute, and they tell you this, and it's happened to guys, it will start to go underwater, fill with water, and it'll go down, it'll drag you down no matter how much inflation you have. It'll just pull you all underwater. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I don't want to be one of those guys that gets dragged underwater. That'd be horrible. So I'm backing my way out of the parachute, and I'm not getting away from all the shroud lines. Now, 30 seconds before this, I'd been sitting up on the flight deck in this comfortable F-14 seat, and now I'm in the ocean. And so my brain is catching up with things. I'm seeing my F-14 float on the water right next to me. And I was sitting there going like, yeah. If I had a camera, I was thinking I would give a finger, to have a camera right now and take a picture of that, but I didn't have a camera. So I just saw the F-14, I saw the carrier go by, and all those guys were running to the side. I see them right up there, and I give them thumbs up. And then I continue to try to back out of my parachute, and I can't get out of it. And in training, they said, don't cut the lines, because if you cut one line, it becomes two lines that you have to deal with. It's a catchy little thing. And this is another pitch for training, or this is another lesson, I guess, training. I'm in the water doing this, and I had been trained for a year before, and I remembered all of it. So it was amazing that the training was right there with me when I needed it. I'm backing out. The helicopter comes and starts flying over me. The helicopter, at all times during flight operations, the Navy has a helicopter fly next to the carrier. And these guys had seen our plane go over the side. They were in exactly the right position. He comes right over and flies right over me. I look up, the helicopter's like 40 feet in the air, just a little bit higher than the ceiling here. I'm looking at the guy, I give him a thumbs up, and he flies away. And I go, that's not the reaction I wanted. So I go, okay, I got my own problems to solve. I got to cut myself out of this shroud lines. So I flipped out my switchblade. Now, this is something else we did. We did equipment checks. We would stand in the ready room with our flight gear, and we'd say, where's your radio? Radio's here. Where's your flares? Flares here. And so when I needed my switchblade, I didn't have to go, where is it? I just pulled it out. Well, the guys who were our crewmen had problems with the switchblades accidentally popping open when they were doing the inspections, and so they duct taped the switchblades closed. So I'm sitting there in the ocean with my thumbnail. I found the end of the switchblade, popped it open, and then I took I grabbed a bunch of lines, I took one swipe, and I don't know if that was like the magic switchblade or whatever, but it felt like it cut all the lines with one swipe. And I was just sitting there, I was busy, but I'm just going like, wow, that is cool, So then the helicopter comes back over me again. They lower a cable with a harness. They drag it over to me. I wrap myself up. They pick me up. And I get in the helicopter, and they say, "Are you okay?" And I felt totally fine. And then I can hear these guys yelling to each other, and they go, "We lost the skipper." And this was the first time that I had thought about the guy I was flying with, because I had just been busy surviving myself. And they said, "We lost the skipper." And I go, "Oh no, I killed the squadron commander from waiting too long." And then they go, no, they just lost sight of him. And they go, "He's over there." So they went over, flew over to him. I go, "Don't do that, So we pulled the skipper up, and I go, "Skipper, we didn't do anything wrong, did we?" He goes, "No, bio, we had to eject." So I go, "Okay, good." So people ask me, how come, why didn't I get run over by the carrier? So I made this little diagram. The planes land on the angled deck. We came off the side, but the ship is going through the water, like I said, 25 miles an hour roughly. We landed over the side. I was right there. And so as soon as you come off, they turn the carrier and try to not hit you. Left, right, whatever it is. I wasn't a ship driver. So we came to the side of the carrier and they turned it. But one reason I did this diagram is that I wanted to show the vertices, the vortex behind the ship. Well, when we got back on the carrier, I said, "Why did you guys lower this cable to me? Why didn't you put a swimmer in the water?" And they go, you probably didn't see this, but your parachute was starting to get wrapped up in the vortex of the ship, or starting to get dragged by the vortex. And we could see you were still in it. So they go, "We wanted to pick you up right away instead of taking the time to put a swimmer in." So I'm glad I didn't know that, Because it was, I couldn't have done anything about it. I was doing the best I could. So this ejection, it raised my profile in the squadron. I was a junior officer, but suddenly here I am with the squadron commander. We ejected. But we went and we gave talks to the other squadrons and told them some of the lessons we learned. We wrote a magazine article for the safety magazine and stuff. And partly because of this, but also the skipper knew that I was trying to be a good Rio and I was trying to do a good job. And so a few months later, I was selected to go through the Topgun school as a student. And so back in 1982, this was before the movie, Top Gun was famous in aviation circles as some of the best flying an aviator would do in his career. And so I was excited to go to the Top Gun school. And as soon as I got there, the very first day, we sat there and we went through the lectures, and these guys were incredible. I mean, they knew their subject inside and out. They were they had great presence in front of the audience, and just, it was incredible. And then the next day when we started flying, it was the same thing in the air. They were in control. They knew everything that was going on. The debriefs were very informative and accurate. It was everything you could expect. Now, I'll save this comment for later, but one thing that they did was when you went through Top Gun, you're a junior officer and you fly with another junior officer. So you have a pilot and Rio flying junior together. So the guy I flew with, he was a very serious guy, a very smart guy, and we had some very candid conversations about how to get through this successfully. And I'll just tell you a few things that seem to be like they could apply to more than just people going through Top Gun. One was very simple. He said, "Hey, Bio, let's make a commitment to be 15 minutes early to every event." And so I go, "That sounds good." And we were 15 minutes early. And so we would get there, And this is the Navy, they weren't serving donuts and coffee, back then. I mean, so you get there 15 minutes early, you're not eating on a donut, you're just there in the room. But, we'd watch our buddies walk in, and some of them would just barely get there on time, or they'd get there late. Oh, we're there, our brains are set up for what we're doing and stuff. 15 minutes may not be necessary for everything, but we committed, we were that early, and I think committing to being early can really help somebody. Something else that we did was we said, you know what? When we're flying, we're both still learning. So if we criticize each other, don't be defensive about it. And the term we used was no personal defensiveness. So we said, look, we're on the same team. We're both trying to do the same thing. Take the criticism as honest and, take it on board. Something else we did was our wingman was another F-14 pilot in Rio. And the two pilots would argue a lot. But we said, we will never argue when other people are around. So we only argued when we were in a room of just the four of us, the two pilots and two Rios. And whenever we were around the Top Gun instructors, we just agreed on everything. And so doing things like that helped us to get through the school. Now, I mean, the guy I was flying with was a very good pilot. The wingman was good. I was able to do my job as a pretty good Rio. So we did have the performance to back it up. But those like little teamwork things and stuff like that, I think those helped us also. So we go through the 5-week Top Gun school. It was everything you can imagine. And then at the end of the school, they said, Bio, you guys did a nice job. They go, if you want to come back as an instructor, let us know. So a few months later, I thought about it, and I went back and I told them, and they said, okay, come back. And so I got to be a Top Gun instructor. And so that's the simplified version. Before I went back and was an instructor, I had to go on another 7.5-month deployment and stuff like that. But anyway, fast forward, and I'm a Top Gun instructor. So once I show up there, and this is me briefing a Top Gun class flight. So once I show up there as an instructor, I got to look behind the curtain, and I figured out how they earned this reputation that they had. Hard work. No surprise there. It's hard work. But there are a few things that they did that I really liked. One, and at the time, I did not think about this stuff. At the time, I was busy living this life and doing stuff. But in the years since, I've been a little bit more insightful and philosophical. One thing that they did, which I'll call is teamwork, and I don't mean, helping your buddy to just get qualified. What they did was they established standards. All the standards were very clearly stated. They were all enforced. And so that was something that I liked about Top Gun. There were no rules there that they did not enforce. If they said something, they meant it. And then, when I say teamwork, they would help you to meet the standards. And in my case, or in all new instructors, it was like practicing your lecture. If you needed help getting your lecture started, picking up a new lecture, and you were not available till 5 p.m., the end of the day, you could get 2 or 3 instructors to come listen to your lecture for another hour or two. And it was just commitment to the team to succeeding. So, you have to put your own commitment in, but you also have a lot of help. And as long as you commit yourself to it, you'll get the help and the assistance. But on the other hand, they demand that you perform at this standard. Something that I still remember is the lecture rules. You'll notice I'm not standing behind the podium. I actually do have a couple of cards up here that I'm cheating with, but Top Gun instructors, we would lecture for 2 hours with no notes. And you would not say the word or anything because you knew everything that you're supposed to say. Top Gun instructors, when they wrote on the board, the handwriting was always neat. When they debriefed a flight, the circles were circular and they were accurate. Now, these guys were not art school students. They were fighter pilots. They liked drinking beer, driving fast, and whatever. But they set that standard to themselves, to be neat and accurate. When they debriefed a guy, they did not say, oh, and then I shot you and you flamed out, simulated shooting. Then I shot you because you were not. No, they said, then the F5 shot the F-14 in the left turn. And the reason they did that was to take the personality out of it, so that the student would not get defensive, that they would see it as a lesson and learn. Something else they did was that they never used their hands, they used models. I brought these models in case anyone asked me a question, but since I've got them here, I'll use them. So, something else that Top Gun instructors did, they never waved the models around. They picked up the models, they used them, and then they put the models down. So, we were very precise in the way we operated back then. For me, as a young guy who loved fighter aviation, I just could not get enough of it. It was, tell me how high to jump and I'll do it. It took a lot of time and a lot of commitment, but I was happy to be there. Top Gun flew the small F-5 Tiger II and the A-4 Skyhawk. These airplanes were inferior to the F-14 and almost in overall performance, but they challenged the F-14 where they needed it most, and that was in dogfight engagement. And that was another reinforcement of the Top Gun, what they taught, is that it doesn't really matter what airplane that a person is flying. If a good pilot knows what his airplane can do and knows his enemy's weaknesses, then he can be more effective. And so the F-14 guys show up in their, big supersonic F-14s and they get shot by little F-5s and A-4s. It gets their attention. And then the Top Gun instructor, though, teaches them what did they do wrong and how they win. Type A personalities. See, I put that in the title of the lecture, so I've got to use the term, while we're talking. Not lecture, title of the presentation. As I said, these guys were, they were fighter pilots, and it is, I got to say this. I've told you about all the rules and all this stuff, but we would go out there and we'd jump into jet fighters and go flying around dogfighting, F-14s and F-18s. It was awesome. That's just the price you pay. You have to be disciplined you have to be disciplined. Okay, it's a job. These guys, this was an Air Force guy on the left and a Marine Corps guy on the right. I still remember taking this because we were in South Carolina. We had just finished fighting some Marine Corps Phantoms. We get out and we started making notes because we were going into the debrief and we needed to be accurate. And I'm just sitting there going, this is cool. This is what this is what Top Gun instructors do. So, okay, we're good on time. Again, any questions? You can stop me. Yes.
If you're simulating dogfights, how do you keep them bumping into each other?
Oh, given simulated dogfights, how did we keep from bumping into each other? That is an excellent question, and the first response is what you see in the movie Top Gun is too close. In the real world, there were training rules, and there were about 12 of them, I believe, and one of the training rules was you cannot get within 500 feet of another airplane, 500-foot bubble. And if an airplane broke a training rule, that engagement was knocked off immediately. And if it was an egregious violation, very safety violation, people went home. And I was actually flying one time when the guy was flying. Let's say we're in the gray airplane. We're flying and he makes a call that we're at low airspeed and can't maneuver. And this other airplane comes up and flew right under us. And I'm watching this guy come up under us, and he was so close that I lifted my feet up as a reflex so his tail didn't hit me. I can still visualize it right now. And my pilot was just furious. He goes, knock it off, join up. That's all he said. And we just went home, and we got back, and he just yelled those guys. Okay, so that's how we keep from hitting each other. Yes?
Can you tell this audience about air-to-air refueling?
Oh, aerial refueling? Okay, I need to tell the audience. I need to tell the audience about aerial refueling. Why are you asking me that?
Well, it's an interesting event.
Okay, I said earlier that carrier landing is some of the most demanding flying that's performed routinely. And the other thing is aerial refueling is in the same category. When the Navy does aerial refueling, let's say this plane has the fuel in it, it streams a basket on a hose that's about 50 to 60 feet long, and the basket is about this big around. And the Navy plane extends a refueling probe and has to come and fly up and plug it into the basket. And it takes an incredible amount of skill. And so we did it day and night because it was a perishable skill, and the pilots did it almost every flight. So it was, yes, it was an incredible experience. Is that good enough? I am sincere. Refueling is another skill it shows a high level of military flying skill. Okay, so let me go back to myself. Okay. So here I am, a Top Gun instructor. I've qualified for 2 lectures. I'm qualified to lead training events. I put in, long hours for 7 days a week, and I finally get all my qualifications, and life gets back to normal. And I'm going, well, I wonder what's going to happen next, because this is all fun, but... And so these black limousines drive on to NAS Miramar. In 1983, an author had written an article in California magazine, and it was about an F-14 crew going through the Top Gun class as students. And these 2 Hollywood producers, Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, saw the article. They said this would make a great movie. And they spent 2 years getting permission and laying the groundwork. And so in 1985, these limos come on to Miramar with the producers and a couple of photography people and things like that. And this is how filming Top Gun got started. And when I heard it was going to be filmed, I'm going like, whatever. Because they had filmed segments of movies, they'd filmed like parts of TV shows, and didn't make a big deal. So this crew comes on, and I'm thinking, they'll make a movie, whatever. But as soon as they got started, you could see that this was, an order of magnitude different, because they were very serious about it. They were very skilled. The technical people knew what they were doing. They asked us, not only Top Gun instructors, but a lot of people around the base. They asked a lot of people, what would you do in this situation? What are some things that you say that are colorful or whatever? So they really got a lot of inputs. So then when it came time to fly, I flew in the black jets. And so these are Top Gun F5s painted black to simulate the MiGs, the enemy. And this is a Learjet that's got cameras on it. It's got cameras on the front and back and on the other side. And then this was me with Rat Willard, who was one of our pilots, after we just got out of a black MiG. The flying was very different from the type of flying that we normally did, the dogfight flying, but it was interesting in its own respect because, we had the guy saying, okay, now we're going to do the scene where Maverick is threatened by the MiGs, and so we all fly behind him, and he goes, cut, just like, cut, and they say, okay, do it again. And so it was kind of fun for the movie. Has anybody worked on a movie? Okay. I don't know what you think about Hollywood people, but the people that make movies, at least big movies, they are serious and they're talented. And so we worked with them, and they knew what they were doing. And when they didn't know what to do, they would ask us. And then they listened, and they go, well, we can't do that, but we can do it. So it was a very good experience for me. At the end of the filming, a pilot and I went up to, I can use the models again. We went up to Hollywood for 2 days because they had all this film and they didn't know how to put it together. Here's one example that I remember. They had a picture of a plane going up like this, and the next scene, they had it coming down like this. So we looked at all this film. They showed us how to use the editing machine, and we go, no, if it goes up like this, it's going to come down like this. And the guy goes, oh. So, to their credit, I mean, this is what we did all day, every day. And so to their credit, they listened to us and worked well with us and stuff. It was fun. We met a lot of interesting people. Okay, this is me, my wife, and Tom Cruise. Okay, this is me. And this is Tom Cruise. And actually, if you'll notice what I'm wearing, when they told us we're going to this party, this movie party, I told my wife, I go, oh, I'll go out and get some Hollywood clothes. So I went out and I bought this goofy shirt. And we show up, and all the actors are wearing leather jackets, and I'm going like, oh, flip. We didn't wear our leather jackets to parties because, if you're in a squadron, everybody's got a leather jacket, so whatever. But anyway, I went to this party, and I never thought another thing about it, but I didn't even think enough to take my own picture, to take a camera. But one of my buddies had his camera. We took this picture and all that stuff, so. Oh. I'm not going to spend any time running Top Gun into the ground, the movie, because it was a movie. It was the #1 movie of the year for 1986. But some of the basic flaws were, as I've already said, they got too close. You would never get that close in real flying. Another one was the idea of never leave your wingman. Okay, they had the guys flying around like this. No, in real combat, the never leave your wingman. It's similar to something we practice called mutual support, but it meant that you remained in the area and was able to support your wingman, not that you flew in formation with them. So there were flaws like that, and I told them to Tony Scott, the director, and he said a cuss word about every 3 words. So I won't repeat his exact response, but he goes, Dave, nobody's going to know that. He goes, you're the only person, you Top Gun instructors are the only ones that know that. Okay, Tony, got it. So since the movie was a success, he was right. Does anybody know what Prandtl-Meyer expansion fans are? Oh, I'm impressed. I told my younger brother, I was coming up to talk to you guys today, and he goes, well, Dave, what's your expertise to go talk to a bunch of scientists? And I said, well, Tom, when I was in college, I took physics twice, so I think I'm qualified, I flunked electromagnetics and had to take it again. So I think I'm qualified because I took it twice. Okay, Prandtl-Meyer expansion fans. Expansion and compression of supersonic gases that forms a shock wave, something like that. Is that right? Okay, so we did not use that term when we were in the business, but we looked at it. We saw it all the time, which is it's what forms these discs in the exhaust. And one of my things was I used to like to take pictures, and I was just fascinated by the F-14's afterburners. And in order to get a good picture, you got to wait till it's dark, because in daylight you can't see it that well in the F-14. Some jets you can, and so you'd have to wait till the evening. But if your timing was just right, you could see the exhaust, you could still see what the airplane was and stuff like that. Okay, so I used that term in here so Dan would let me give a lecture because it made it sound more professional. So that's why, that's all it is, Dan. Shameless. Since we're looking at eye candy, I thought I'd just add this other picture in here. We used to get to see, if you fly jets, we used to say this about the business. It's hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of terror, or you could say excitement. But if you're flying jets, a lot of time you spend time just tooling around the sky, not doing much. But every once in a while you'll see something cool. So I rigged up a camera. I actually had a camera on a small tripod that I set on top of the radar. And one day we were flying. It was very humid. I asked my pilot to do a slight turn. And we got those effects. You can see the vapor on the top of the wing and the vapor from the tip. So I retired in 1999. Oh, darn, one more slide. Later in my career, the F-14 picked up the air-to-ground bombing mission. And this was a capability that the jet had from its inception, but it had minor hardware issues, but I also think more of a community institutional resistance. They didn't want to drop bombs. But eventually we did pick up the bombing mission, and by the time the community took it, it was embraced. It was very demanding to do air-to-ground ordnance delivery, and people embraced it. The thing that made a big difference was we had the Lantern precision targeting pod. Even though these are cluster bombs, they would not use the precision targeting pod. That pod made a big difference. Yes, question?
Yeah, you said there was some resistance from the community to that idea. Why was that?
Okay, the resistance to that idea, this is Dave's personal opinion. I think it was just, hey, we fly fighters. We do air-to-air. We're not going to drop bombs. Just, self-indulgent or whatever. And that's very unofficial. So the F-14 also had a reconnaissance mission. And so we carried a reconnaissance pod. And so some guys were carrying the pod and carrying bombs, and they said, hey, I wonder if we could take a picture of a bomb after we drop it. And so I wish I had thought of this. I did not, but I shanghaied the picture. They took the picture of this bomb as it fell away. And there's a sequence as the bomb gets smaller and smaller, but 2 pictures get you the idea. So in 1999, I retired from the Navy, and that was the end of my flying career. I actually saw this cartoon in a magazine in like 1980, and I cut it out and kept it, and then I realized it applied. So I got a job as a defense contractor. I was driving home from work one night. I thought I would write a magazine article about making the Top Gun movie. And then I said, no, I think I'll write a book. Has anybody written a book in here? It's okay. If you ever think about writing a book sometime in your life, it is a lot of fun writing a book. I mean, I enjoyed it. So I talked to my wife. She said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. You need a hobby. So I wrote a book. My book is called Top Gun Days. It was published. And then, I don't know what else to say about it. That's what's called Top Gun Days. It's out there. One of the more interesting things was it was translated into Chinese on the left and Japanese on the right. And as I was telling Dan earlier, I actually get royalties from the Chinese and Japanese sales. And he goes, you do, So yes, I get, they did not, it wasn't a victim of piracy. It was all legitimate. So then after that was out, I wrote a second book called Before Top Gun Days, which talked about the Pensacola training and stuff. And I haven't covered much of that here, but people were wondering, how do you get started in this? And then I also have written the third book that's coming out next year, and that's going to be called Tomcat Rio. And that one has, if you read Top Gun Days, it's a clean story about, because there's a lot about being a Top Gun instructor and stuff like that. So Tomcat Rio tells a little bit more of the backstory and some of the more of the turbulence and things like that. So what I would like to leave you with is, I hope I left you with a few nuggets that you say, oh yeah, I learned a little something, so that was worth my time. Or at least I've entertained you a little bit and given you some background on things that you didn't know about or haven't thought about. I've got the time to answer questions if anyone has any more questions, but at this point, I definitely appreciate your attention and thank you for having me. I filled the time. Oh, there's a question. Yes. Okay, excuse me. What was the question?
As an instructor, what are the first classes that
Oh, as an instructor, what are the first classes that you started teaching? That's an excellent question because even at Top Gun, there are 2 levels of classes. The first level is, it's just information, and it's things such as teaching and learning, course rules at NAS Miramar and things like that. The second level is a tactics lecture where you actually have to describe American tactics and you have to be ready to answer questions about them. Most instructors start with one of the former, and then after they've got that experience, they pick up a tactics lecture. So in my case, my first lecture was about Soviet bombers. So it's all information. And then after I did that, I got a tactics lecture for F-14 intercepts, which was very challenging. Is that what you're thinking of? Yes?
What was the role of the backseater in a Top Gun adversary aircraft?
Oh, that's a good question. The role of the backseater in the Top Gun adversary aircraft. In this case, it's like I said before, Navy, oh wait a minute, I got some more eye candy also, so I might as well just step through this. Navy pilots, most of the Top Gun airplanes were single seat. Those guys, they could fly the plane, they could lead the mission, they could do everything by themselves. But we had backseaters, so let's put them to work. So what we did was we shared duties in the cockpit. I would operate the direction finder in the back seat, and so I would switch, and we'd try to see where the fighters were coming from. And then also, if there was a radar intercept issue during the flight, then the backseater would take the lead on evaluating and debriefing that. Now, for flights, I could be the mission commander, even as a backseater. I could not fly the plane, but I would plan the flight. That picture that you saw of me, I was briefing the flight. I was telling everybody, you go to this point, you go this time, you're on this radio frequency, So I could be the mission commander. And if that was the case, then the pilot I was flying with, he would just work with me to do what we needed to do to get the mission. So it was, I got to tell you, it was really a great system. It was challenging. I mean, it was very demanding. But it was very demanding on pilots too. So it was great to be held up, to meet those challenges. Did you have anything else in mind, or is that what okay? Yes?
Can I ask you about the parachute? Is it that you have so much harness you can't simply slip out of it, that you have to do the shroud lines?
Okay, that's a good question. Can you slip out of your parachute harness, or do you have to cut the shroud lines? So that's good. What is supposed to happen is you hit the water, you release 2 fittings up here, and your parachute drifts away. And so you remain in your harness and your parachute is gone. But because the way I fell down, and again, they teach you this in training because it sometimes happens, my parachute didn't drift. It just came around and I was swimming in all the lines. But so I released these fittings, but my parachute didn't, I was still caught up in it. So good. Yes?
So when you're landing on a carrier, don't you normally go to full power in case you miss a hook or something?
Okay, this is the question that I hate. When you're landing on the carrier, don't you normally go to full power? Yes. And in fact, now my pilot, I'm telling you, he's still around. I'm still in contact with him. He is a great guy. And the lieutenants in the squadron said, "Skipper, how come you weren't at full power and just went around?" Well, he said he brought the throttles back thinking that he could stop on the flight deck. But my thought is that the cable slowed us down. We were at 50 knots because I measured the video one day when I was bored. And we were at 50 knots. We could have been at full power. We were not going to fly. And in fact, when we came off the angle, you'll notice it didn't go like, it just dropped. So so it's an academic question. Yes, he was supposed to be at full power.
Partially caught the fourth cable?
We fully caught the fourth cable. Oh, God, I didn't go into that very well, did I? We fully caught the fourth cable. it wasn't set to the correct weight. I left that out of my, thank you. I left that out of my explanation. It was set to the wrong weight. We pulled the gear all the way out, and then, so it slowed us down. And then it slowed us down again when the cable broke. But it didn't stop us because it broke and we went over the side. Yeah, that's what happened. Oh, how did I pick my ejection handle? Yeah, that's funny because I reached for this one reflexively, and my pilot, who had to wait 9/10 of a second for the sequence, 9/10 of a second, he got tired of waiting and was reaching for the upper handle. So, and he said, you know, because we did extensive debriefs afterwards, he said in his entire flying career, he had always decided he was going to reach for the upper handle. So he had made that decision. I had never given it much thought, so I just reached for this one, and I was glad. Also, this is not the actual handle that, let's see what else. Oh, cool. I love that picture. This is not the actual handle. The handle is attached by a cable to the seat, and it was jerked out of my hand. But when I got back on the ship, the guys said, hey, Lieutenant, this one, we can't use this one, so here, you can have it. So they gave me a souvenir, which was very nice. You know, people, okay. Any other questions or?
I just commented about the fact that you look down and you grab the handle.
Yes.
They've done some research now, and they found that that the signal to the arm to grab something goes before your mind was conscious that you told it to do that. So that's a valid option.
You're kidding. You can put me down as a case study. I mean, that was cool. And I think at the time I thought that was cool. I go, oh, that's, you know, wow. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Sir, what do you think about the shift for adversary squadrons from actual, Navy squadrons to contractors now?
Oh, the shift from adversary squadrons from Navy and Air Force to contractors. You know what? It's a good response to an unfortunate situation. As the military gets smaller, it's just another example of outsourcing. I was talking to one of my buddies who I knew from Top Gun, who now makes his living flying adversary stuff, and he said the same thing. It would cost the military, not just the Navy, all of them, a lot of money in terms of people and airplanes to support all the adversary squadrons that they need. But these business guys, I mean, I don't know how they do it, but they figured out that they can fly the jets for, less than the military would have to spend if it was a Navy squadron. So the Navy, I think the Air Force, they still have a few adversary squadrons, but they're supported by a lot of contractors. And I just think it's a good solution. Yes?
Would it make you feel better to know that APL is helping adversary squadrons?
Would it make you feel better to know that APL? Okay, thank you. Yes?
Do other nations have Top Gun equivalent?
Oh, do other nations have Top Gun equivalent? I think they do. I think there was a few years ago, some guys showed me a picture of a Chinese Top Gun squadron. Yeah, that's a good question, and I do know that other nations have adversary training, but I'm not really sure if they have a Top Gun qualification. So I guess I really don't know. Yes?
So with the U.S. options,
Allied nations come to
Yes, back in the day, some allied countries did come through Top Gun, but I don't know if they took that back to their country or whatever. Were you gonna say something else though? Okay. Yes.
Back to the refueling. I've talked to a lot of pilots that have recently come back over the last 5-10 years on Afghanistan. So that's a long distance from the carrier. They had a tank twice going in and tank twice coming back out in order for them to drop their line. So in terms of being a 10 or 12-hour mission, it's a long time to sit in that seat.
So he says that he talked to pilots that flew in Afghanistan 10 to 12 hours, and they had the tank twice going in and twice going back, and it's a long time to sit in their seat. In my next book, which I'm not really plugging, I'm just telling you that this story does reverberate with me. My longest flight was 7.5 hours on an air defense exercise, And I got so tired of sitting in that seat that what I did was I ran the seat all the way down because it's height adjustable. I undid my lap straps and I stood in the ejection seat. So I left my shoulder connected because I go, if we have to eject during this 45 seconds when I'm doing this, I don't want to get killed because, although I probably, anyway. But yeah, you get tired of sitting in that ejection seat for 2 hours is easy, 4 hours is tolerable, but more than that, it just gets old. So, any other questions? Yes?
Did you lose your jet when it went over the side of your craft?
Oh, did we lose the jet when it went over the side? Yes. There was, in that video, the video is such low quality that it's not really worth showing more, but I looked at it very carefully. I think you can see the tail of the jet floating at about the 3-minute mark, but it sank, and it was in the Indian Ocean. The water was about 12,000 or 14,000 feet deep, and there's no way to recover it. Plus, when it just splashed into the water, it would have been damaged, and salt water, yeah, just as a write-off. Nope. The Navy would try to recover an airplane if there was a fatality or if the cause was not known. In our case, there was no fatality, and they knew exactly what caused it. It was a chain of events. I mean, the guy who was supposed to set the cable to the right weight, he was not trained. His supervisor wasn't supervising him. And then there was backup gauges on the edge of the flight deck and up in the control tower on the island. And the backup gauges for the 4-wire had been broken forever, and everybody knew they were broken. And so there was all these pieces lined up, and then the guy who was supposed to set the dial, he heard the 1, 2, and 3 wire. They said 1 wire set F-14, 2 wire set F-14. Well, he said 4 wire set F-14. He said those words, but he didn't move the dial because he heard them say it. So he goes, oh, I guess that's what I'm supposed to say. So, I mean, everybody was lucky that nobody was killed or hurt. Yes?
So did that lead to improved procedure for future?
We were talking about the Naval Aviation Safety Program. I don't think it did. What I think it did was, in this case, I recall they got a technician out and they fixed the gauges, but I think it broke, and they got all the procedures in place. I mean, accidents happen. For me, it makes me think of Winston Churchill's saying about being shot at and missed or something like that. I mean, I thought it was so cool. I found, because I didn't suffer any, thing. I found myself floating in the water. I get pulled out by the helicopter, and my next flight, which was a few days later, we're getting in the airplane, and the guy that I was flying with was a F-8 Crusader pilot. And as he's putting on his flight gear, and he goes, now, Bio, we probably won't have to eject on this flight. So, but no, it was a great adventure. So, too bad they lost the plane, but any other questions? Oh, okay. Just 1 second. I'll make another point. APL probably did this too, as far as I know. But okay, the upper airplane is the tactical paint scheme or lower vis that came about in the 1980s, and the lower airplane is the previous gloss gray. And I actually saw, and if you guys, I don't know if you saw this, but if you see a plane like this flying in formation at a distance of 5 miles or more, you can see the light gray one, and you can't see the tactical paint scheme very easily. So it actually works. You can't hide an F-14, but at a distance, it does make it harder to see. So it was effective, I thought. So yes?
You showed a picture of Tom Cruise. I'd like to ask about Kelly McGillis. But for real, can you talk about the role of civilian analysts?
Yes. I showed a picture of Tom Cruise, but he wants to hear about Kelly McGillis' character. So do you all know Christine Fox? Okay, so she was the analyst. She's here. Yes. She was assigned to the fighter wing, but at the time she wasn't directly assigned to the Top Gun squadron, but we all knew her. And she did good work. I mean, I remember I only talked to her about a couple of projects back then. This is where the movie delves into, they take artistic license. As I understand it, when the people came in the limousines on the first day, they saw Dr. Fox and they said, wow, can you be in our movie? Because they tried to put F-14 pilots and Rios in the movie, which they did in a few places. And also they changed the story. I think Tom Cruise was supposed to have a relationship with a bartender or something, or a cocktail waitress, but they go, oh, well, this girl, if there's a girl on the base, she can be in the story. So they, they moved her closer to the Top Gun squadron and all that. And in this Proceedings magazine, the Center for Naval Analysis, the guy who just left, I believe, as the analyst assigned to Top Gun, he wrote a great article about some of the work they've done. So yeah, she was there at the time. She was the inspiration for Kelly McGillis's character. And as I was telling Dan earlier, because I remember, she had a lot of respect. And believe me, 10 fighter squadrons worth of guys is a hard audience, especially back in the 1980s, But she had the respect of the people on the base. So good for her. Yes, you can say that if you want. I'm not. I did not meet Kelly McGillis. When we were filming the movie, I met basically everybody, except I did not meet her, and I don't think I met Val Kilmer. And the actors at the time, they weren't famous. Tom Cruise, we barely heard of him, but so, and as example, I didn't take any pictures of them. We hung out with them at an event or two. We went at a social event. It's like, whatever, who are these guys? We're the Top Gun instructors. Who are they? Okay, any other questions? Or I'm flexible today, but I know you guys all have jobs and stuff like that. So thank you very much again for your attention.